Hi, welcome to Oriental Secret Garden. Have you ever found a piece of art that seemed to freeze time? Well, over 30 years ago, I stepped into a quiet old bookstore in Tokyo and came across a print that would stay with me ever since. It was a vivid woodblock triptych from the Meiji period, showing a parade of elegantly dressed women, cherry blossoms in full bloom, and the bustling streets of what was once Japan's most famous pleasure district, Shin-Yoshiwara. At first glance, the colors pull you in. Bold reds, deep greens, that unmistakable Meiji vibrancy. But the more I looked, the more I realized this wasn't just a beautiful picture. It was a window into a world that was disappearing. In the center, you see the oiran, high-ranking courtesans, not geisha, but part of a different, older system, making their ceremonial spring walk, known as the dochu. Their elaborate hairstyles, multi-layered kimonos, and high-platform sandals weren't just fashion. They were symbols of status, ritual, and performance. And then, there they are. Two women in Western-style dresses, almost like they've walked in from another world. This contrast between the fading Edo traditions and the rapidly modernizing Meiji Japan, that's what makes this image so striking. It captures not just a scene, but a moment of cultural tension, a society on the edge of change. Let's take a closer look at what's actually happening in this image. This isn't just one print. It's a triptych, meaning three separate vertical sheets placed side by side, creating one wide panoramic scene. That format was really popular in the late Edo and Meiji periods, especially for scenes with movement, ceremony, or lots of figures. And what a scene this is. We're standing in the heart of Shin-Yoshiwara, the licensed pleasure district of Old Tokyo. It's early spring, cherry blossoms are blooming overhead, and the streets are filled with spectators. Men, women, even children, all lining up to watch something spectacular. What they're watching is a courtesan parade, known as a dochu. Leading the way is a young girl, likely an apprentice. Then comes the star, the oiran. She's wearing a heavy, layered kimono, her obi tied in the front, a unique sign of her rank. Her wooden clogs are enormous, so high she needs attendants to help her walk. Flanking her are more women, assistants, lower-ranking attendants, and perhaps even newer apprentices hoping to one day rise to that same position. It's not chaotic. In fact, it's highly choreographed, a walking ritual. A performance meant to impress not only potential patrons, but the public at large. It says, elegance, control, tradition. This isn't just fashion on parade, it's status made visible. A lot of people see a woman in a kimono with elaborate hair and think, ah, that must be a geisha. But actually, no. The women in this print are not geisha, they are oiran, and that makes a world of difference. Geisha were entertainers. Their world revolved around music, dance, witty conversation, and performance. While many people associate them with seduction, their primary role wasn't sexual. In fact, geisha often lived by strict codes of conduct. Oiran, on the other hand, were licensed courtesans, part of a highly structured, government-regulated system in places like Yoshiwara. But don't imagine this as a simple brothel. To even meet an oiran, a client had to go through a process, a formal introduction, a middleman, a series of appointments. These women were incredibly exclusive, and they were educated. They trained in poetry, calligraphy, etiquette, incense arts, things you might associate with nobility. Their public appearance, like the one we're seeing in this print, was more than just a stroll. It was a social event, a public spectacle, a ritualized performance of beauty, hierarchy, and grace. And it wasn't just for men. Townspeople would come out to see the latest fashions, gossip about which courtesan had risen in status, or simply admire the grandeur. Think of it like the red carpet of Edo-era society, only with deeper cultural layers underneath. Now, let's talk about the two figures that truly stand out. Over on the right, beneath the cherry blossoms and among the crowd of spectators, we see two women dressed in Western-style clothing. Long skirts, high-neck blouses, hats, gloves, and a posture that's upright, self-possessed, even confident. They feel different, like they've walked straight out of a different world and into this scene from Japan's feudal past. And that's exactly what makes them so fascinating. This print was created in 1888 in the heart of the Meiji era, a time when Japan was undergoing a massive transformation. After centuries of isolation, the country had opened to the West. Trains, telegrams, suits, top hats, and corsets were flooding in. The slogan of the time? Civilization and Enlightenment. Bunmei Kaika. These two women may represent the new face of Japanese womanhood. Perhaps they were teachers, or students, or daughters of upwardly mobile families. They're not necessarily foreigners. They could just as easily be Japanese women who had adopted Western dress, a growing trend at the time in urban areas like Tokyo and Yokohama. Or they might not be real individuals at all. They might have been inserted by the artist to heighten the contrast. Tradition versus modernity. Kimono versus corset. Floating world versus industrial world. One stands slightly taller and carries herself with pride. The other appears more modest, glancing to the side. They're silent witnesses in this moment of ritual, but their very presence changes how we interpret the scene. They don't belong to the past, but they're not fully part of the future either. It's almost like they're standing in the doorway between two eras, observing the end of one world and the uncertain birth of another. Now let's look up, above the procession, into the air itself. What do we see? A sea of cherry blossoms, soft pink, whisper white. They're not outlined like the figures below. Instead, they seem to float, dissolve, and blur into the sky. This isn't just artistic flair. It's a traditional woodblock technique called bokashi, a kind of delicate color gradation achieved by hand during printing. You see it here in the fading petals, the soft background tones, and the dreamy atmosphere of spring. It creates a sense of ephemerality, the feeling that this beauty is here for just a moment and then gone. That's no accident. In Japanese culture, cherry blossoms symbolize impermanence, mujo, the fleeting nature of life, beauty, fame, a reminder that everything is in motion, always changing, and that symbolism fits this scene perfectly. By 1888, the Oiran system was already in decline. The world around them was modernizing. New forms of entertainment, Western fashion, a changing legal structure. The elegant courtesan, once the pinnacle of refinement, was gradually becoming a figure of the past. The intense colors in this print, the bright reds and greens, weren't possible in earlier woodblock eras. These were aniline pigments, chemically produced and imported from Europe. They gave Meiji prints a shocking brilliance, sometimes even unnatural to earlier viewers. But in this context, they feel just right. Bold, arresting, almost defiant. Like one last brilliant bloom before the season fades. So when you bring it all together, the blossoms, the pigments, the ritual, the foreign onlookers, this isn't just a spring day in Yoshiwara. It's a portrait of a tradition at its height and at its threshold. A world still radiant, still proud, but already touched by the winds of change. Let's pause for a moment to talk about the artist behind this print. Meido Kunimasa IV. He belonged to the famous Utagawa school, one of the most prolific lineages in Ukiyo-e history. His name connects him to Utagawa Kunimasa lamps, a towering figure in 19th-century printmaking, known for his elegant kabuki actors, bijinga, beauty portraits, and fashion-focused scenes. Kunimasa before continued that legacy into the Meiji period. His style carries the same attention to fabric detail, dramatic composition, and human gesture. But he was also working in a time of intense change, when the Ukiyo-e tradition was beginning to be challenged by photography, lithography, and changing tastes. And yet, this print from Meiji 21, 1888, shows the vitality and relevance the art form still carried. The publisher, Katada Chojiro, operated out of Tokyo's Asakusa district, a center of performance and print culture. He issued works for a domestic audience and also for export, and his collaboration with Kunimasa IV helped preserve a form of storytelling that was beginning to fade. Interestingly, this print, like many Meiji works, was backed with a stiff board at the time of sale. This was likely done to reinforce the paper, protect it during handling, or prepare it for decorative display, especially for international buyers. It signals that these works were not just consumables, but keepsakes, a celebration of a world already beginning to turn into memory. Now let's step back and talk about how this image looks, not in 1888, but today. To modern eyes, this work is a visual feast. The bold color blocks, the layering of textures, the delicate gradients in the blossoms, the towering kimono silhouettes. It has a kind of graphic intensity that feels surprisingly modern, almost poster-like. This comes from the use of synthetic pigments, yes, but also from the mindset of the Meiji period, to absorb new ideas and amplify old ones. To take the visual grammar of Edo and push it further. That's why this print feels not just like a historical record, but like a design object. Collectors and curators today are increasingly drawn to Meiji-era ukiyo-e, especially prints like this one, because they offer that perfect tension between tradition and reinvention, between symbolic culture and graphic experimentation. It's no surprise that designers around the world turn to works like this for inspiration. In fashion, printmaking, interior design, even film and animation. The floating world may have ended, but its visual power never faded. Now let's look at the bottom margin, where the small characters tell a story of their own. Printed, April, Meiji 21. Publisher, Katada Chojiro, Asakusa, Tokyo. This was a seasonal release, timed to match the cherry blossom bloom, echoing the scene depicted in the image. Viewers of the time might have purchased it as a keepsake, a decorative object, or even a gift. It would have hung in merchant shops, homes, and later found its way into private collections and export crates. As the Meiji era progressed, woodblock prints began to lose commercial popularity, replaced by new media. But ironically, that decline also led to a new kind of appreciation. Collectors began to see these prints not just as entertainment, but as artifacts. That's why so many Meiji prints, including this one, survive today in good condition, often mounted or preserved with care. Each surviving copy is a survivor of time. Each one tells a slightly different story. So, what are we really seeing? Yes, it's a picture of a parade, of women in beautiful clothes. A slice of history, maybe. But it's also something deeper. It's a record of elegance in transition, of ritual, art, and identity, set against the fast-moving currents of modernity. For me, this was the very first ukiyo-e print I ever collected, and it became the doorway into a world I'm still exploring. It opened up questions about beauty, performance, gender, history, and how societies preserve the things they know are disappearing. It may depict a lost world, but when we look at it and think about it and talk about it, we bring that world back into the light. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the floating world of Shin-Yoshiwara. If you're interested in related artworks or collectibles, feel free to check out our Etsy or eBay store. The links are in the description below. See you next time.